Greetings, dear friends. We are sincerely happy to welcome you again. And today, we are going to talk to the esteemed Igor Mikhailovich Danilov.
Hello.
Igor Mikhailovich, in the previous video, we touched upon a very important topic. We were talking about the mechanism of accepting thoughts, human decision making, and we were talking about how the thoughts and scenarios imposed on us by consciousness differ from those that we consciously choose as personality. And our friends shared that indeed, they had been able to observe the work of their consciousness and see that thoughts really are discrete, they are sort of disjoint. And some of our viewers were very happy that they recognized situations in their lives where they perceived the picture holistically, perceived it from the position of personality. What you described when you see the whole picture in its entirety, all the cause and effect relationships, all the thoughts and scenarios from the beginning to the end, and what exact results certain actions will lead to. And of course, it's a very amazing and wonderful experience. Some would certainly like to experience it at least once in their lives, or better yet, more. And some would like this experience to be with them much more often, because it does give such freedom and allows you not to be a pawn in someone else's game, in the game of the two crooks, as you said, primary and secondary consciousness, which are in the head of a human, although you've correctly said that they are not even in the human head. The first question is regarding this. Igor Mikhailovich, can a person at the beginning of the spiritual path already distinguish where this perception is from personality and where the perception is from consciousness? And how to bring as close as possible, let's say, the moment when you will perceive all life situations and all thoughts, that your consciousness slips you from the viewpoint of personality.
Well,
can a person differentiate this at the initial stages of the spiritual path, where he is as personality
it's difficult.
and where he is as consciousness?
Frankly speaking, it is very difficult. Why? If a person has lived all his life as all people, so to say, and he was ruled either by secondary or by primary consciousness, he didn't even notice the transition, who he is and when these players change. And he associated himself precisely with primary or with secondary consciousness. And to gain freedom out of the blue, well, it may theoretically be possible, friends, but in practice, everything is much more complicated than one would like. I'll put it this way, until a person defines a goal for himself, a real goal, and actually begins to strive for it, he is unlikely to achieve anything. Why? Because primary consciousness, for example, is so ingrained in a human that it's extremely difficult to separate it somehow.
To disidentify oneself.
Yes, just to separate, to isolate, because a person most often perceives himself as primary consciousness. My body, my egoism, everything revolves around me. This is what is brought up from childhood. This is what a person grows up with. But it is also difficult to separate secondary consciousness, especially in its freedom, from primary consciousness. If a person has never done that, never observed it, and doesn't understand what it is, well, I would say to embark on the spiritual path and to get freedom right away, God grant you, friends, such happiness. But actually, you have to fight for it. Sometimes it takes many years for a person just to realize that he is personality. And it is really so. And it takes a lot of effort and hard work. Let's recall, let's say, all the ordeals of the saints. After all, it was exactly a struggle of a person for his inner freedom. It was only for realizing oneself as personality, that he is part of the spiritual world. This was an attempt to separate himself from Satan. Yet, how long did people have to fight for this? Yes, there were those who traversed this path easily and quickly, but they had a clear goal, and nothing got in their way. When the goal is defined, when there is a real aspiration, any gate opens up. But when a person lives an ordinary life and is so bogged down in, say, manipulations by shaitan, then it is extremely difficult for him to separate from that shaitan in order to at least see him. And without seeing him, you won't get freedom.
And it's also very easy to see him in another person, in other people, somewhere outside.
You know,
but it is very difficult to recognize him somehow and to direct the gaze into yourself.
you can see the speck in someone else's eye.
To understand how he works in you.
Yes. No matter how much you've watched someone, you won't understand if you don't work on yourself. And that's extremely important, especially in the spiritual plane. It's really important, friends. Why? Well, we've been told from our childhood, it's been instilled in us, that the devil must look like some kind of a horned goat with hooves and things like that. Well, maybe somebody associates himself with that because what we see in the mirror is exactly that part of the material mortal world. Meaning, this is what belongs to the devil. And there is no need to flatter yourself. We take care of him much more than of ourselves, because we have been taking care of Satan practically since our first awareness of who we are, of the fact that we exist at all. You see, not even who we are, this is already in the spiritual aspect, but in this case, that we exist at all. When we first began to feel that I exist, still being little, we do everything for our bodies. Isn't that so? You can't argue here either. Even a toddler, what does he fight for? For the power of attention. He strives to attract attention to himself in all kinds of ways, including fooling around, disobedience, yelling, and everything in between. A battle of two demons.
To expand the territory of influence.
Or even three, or even more, begins. Yes, I mean, when parents try to somehow tame the child so that he is brought up a decent person, so that he's a good child, then they think up, as they say now, such Japanese upbringing.
Methods.
The child may do whatever he wants up to the age of 5, meaning that his imp must become stronger. And then the child has no concept of discipline at all. So what does it mean? The freedom of whom?
Of primary consciousness.
How hard will it be for the person afterwards? It will be even harder for him, right? So the child will have even more problems afterwards if he embarks on the spiritual path. Why? The discipline. It turns out it is extremely important, which must be formed practically from the first steps in the first words of the child.
So that the secondary consciousness controls the ego of the manifesting primary consciousness and vice versa. The primary one already...
And vice versa, of course.
Yes.
And it's very important that children may grow up with an understanding that every one of them is a human being after all. Not in the sense of physical body and work of consciousness, but in the sense of spirituality. A human is interesting. In fact, he is complex, very complex. But on the other hand, everything is very simple. And this paradox creates problems at the moment of, say, a person's liberation, or even his aspiration for liberation. After all, a person often sets a goal. Yes, I want to be spiritually saved. I aspire to God, to the spiritual world. And immediately, primary consciousness distracts him. That's it. And that goal is like autogenic training. You and I discussed once that people try to suggest to themselves that they aspire to the spiritual world, but in fact, everything is set against the background of the game of two consciousnesses.
Power and manipulation.
Well, of course, everything is substituted. So the first thing a person should do is to define his goal. The second is he must answer two simple questions, and he must answer them repeatedly throughout the day. Who is he, and where is he? That's when it all falls into place. Not everything is that easy. I tell you, you have to start with simple elementary practices, at least observation of your consciousness, and then with methods of displacement, at least of that very circle. When you displace these thoughts outside the circle, when you observe secondary consciousness from aside, at least with the help of primary consciousness, then from the vastness of secondary consciousness, you already look at primary consciousness, at its primitivity. It all isn't easy after all. It all takes time and study.
You know, Igor Mikhailovich, another point that our viewers often raise is that it is very difficult, especially at the beginning of the spiritual path, to cope with emotions and in particular with the fear of death, which manifests itself in critical situations. How can it be actually leveled out? How to extinguish it, so to say? Because precisely at these moments, people lose their positions as personality. And is it necessary to fight with these emotions, with the emotions of fear?
Fear is a natural part of a human being, and a person who lacks fear is critically ill. This is really scary. and far from safe. And trying to suppress fear in oneself is wrong. You have to learn to use fear. It should be controlled, but not suppressed under any circumstances. While many people who often have, shall we say, unreasonable fears, try to get rid of them. Many people even start taking medication, as you say, fear of death, or something else, but this is already a manipulation of a person after all.
So it is no longer a rational fear,
Of course.
but exactly the kind of an inflated, irrational one.
This is already a manipulation from consciousness. It's just that a person pays attention to it. He allocates, let's say, his life to thinking over these processes in order to get frightened. It is extremely beneficial for consciousness itself, and precisely consciousness creates all these emotions, all these pictures. When a person understands that this is manipulation, he gets rid of it easily, but only if he realizes that consciousness is not him, that consciousness is just a tool. And it is a tool from the outside, It is a controlled tool that resides in the person himself. And consciousness is controlled from the outside. This should be studied as well, and this should be understood as well, because it is extremely important. And then, based on all that, everything falls into place. You see? That is, when a person does not get rid of fear, but on the contrary, he learns to use it. For example, fears can be different. Of course, unreasonable ones should be removed. They are of no use. They fall off at once. When a person begins to understand what fear is, right? This is very simple. When a person has calmed down a little bit and disciplined his consciousness, everything falls into place. As for removing the fear that makes us look around and make the right decision when we go out on the road, it must not be eliminated. Otherwise, we cross the road once, twice, and on the third time, our life is over, while consciousness benefits from it.
So not all fears and not all emotions of fear have to be fought, right?
Of course, far from all.
So, as for the irrational ones, surely yes, like those emotions that precede thoughts, which then drives us into a state of panic.
Well, manipulations, yes, common manipulative fears should not interfere with a person's life, while those that guard his life are important and necessary. You just have to learn how to use them. Again, what is fear? Fear is adrenaline. And what is adrenaline, friends? It's speed. It's stamina. It's lightning-fast thinking. It is, first and foremost, a focus on something. Only while on adrenaline can you focus on something so much that there is even a narrowing of consciousness. That is, you even lose your peripheral vision if the fear comes from a specific point, right?
A narrowed down solution to the issue, yes?
Of course. Or on the contrary, there is an expansion of perception. Let's say, those very processes, when at the moment of fear in a critical situation, everything slows down.
Exactly.
After all, who hasn't been in such situations when time really simply stops, and in a fraction of a second, you solve what would take you dozens of seconds. You have time to think it over, make the right decision, and also, let's say, correctly move your body, for example, in space, to the right place.
And who in us perceives this way, Igor Mikhailovich?
In this case, it's already personality who perceives this holistically. Why? Because there is no process of reflection. And notice, when there is such a moment of, let's say, real threat, that time stops. There are no thought processes. There is a clear perception. You already know both the cause and the effect, and you know how to act.
Yes.
And this is where it is extremely important to learn to act. If a person has learned to act at the moment of adrenaline rush, it's only a plus. There are no downsides here. This is when a person is using natural mechanisms that have been forming in us for a long time. It is a very important and necessary mechanism, and it is disastrous to take it away. I will give you a simple example, okay? Well, for instance, a hurricane is coming. A person who has a developed primary consciousness, or he was fighting his fears, or something else, it does not matter, does not assess the situation adequately. Yes, he has fear, he is afraid, but he locks it up and does not get a holistic picture. So, In reality, a hurricane is coming. It's coming to them. And the person says, "No, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not leaving. I'm fine. It will pass me by." You know, such confidence. We have already discussed this. Again, why? Primary consciousness, it's very attached to its place, to its home, or to something else, especially if it is dear to it. After all, this is my home, and my home is my fortress.
Yes.
You've heard such an expression, haven't you? Well, it immediately becomes not only his fortress, but also his grave. Why? Because a person used his fear irrationally. Primary consciousness has won. He failed to perceive the picture holistically, how scary and complex it was, and he didn't take appropriate actions. You see, fear is an extremely important thing, and if a person actually sees a hurricane coming, even if he has little time, if this turns into a big trouble, then, let's say, when he is accustomed to acting at the moment of the surge of fear, when there is a release of this adrenaline, then as personality, he can easily perceive all the information that comes to him from primary consciousness. And here, notice, personality directly perceives neither our vision nor our hearing. Nothing. Primary consciousness perceives this, but when it is trained, just upon release of this adrenaline, it does not philosophize. It gives all information to us as personality. And personality does not have a thinking process. It has a decision-making process. In other words, it sees holistically. If I go down to the basement, there will be this and that. If I go somewhere else, would I have enough time or anything else? This is extremely important. And such people survive more often. Why? Because they perceive everything in a broader way. And I will put it simply, it is really so. People who engage in self-development, but by the will of fate happen to be on the front line, and get to the field, there is artillery fire and everything else. This is disastrous. This is scary. Of course, they experience fear. And those who are really engaged in spiritual self-development do not fight the fear. It is very important. You have to use it properly. You have to learn to act at the moment of this release, the development of this fear. And what does it give? Survival rate is much higher. Why? Because even when a person moves to a new area, under the influence of fear, he has holistic perception. He perceives every bump, every hole. That is, this is all a subconscious process. He already keeps somewhere closer to a safer place, and in case of a threat, he instantly hides. Whereas if a person falls into a panic or something else, he starts to look for a place. That is, he is out of the shelter.
Analysis.
He is out in the open. Of course, by the time he has thought it over, by the time he has made up his mind, there is no one to make a decision anymore. And it's really so. And again, look, there is another very important moment. For example, let's say a person falls from some height, and fear activates in him. Naturally, fear of falling and so on. If a person falls into a panic, he gets serious injuries. If a person has already used his consciousness as a tool, and he has used his fear as a tool, and he is used to acting, then during the fall, he can roll properly, he can choose the right angle of fall, and he is injured less or has no injuries at all. So if a person cannot use fear for his own good, cannot act in the moment of fear, he will be seriously injured, sometimes fatally, right? If a person has learned to use, let's say, his fear, and act in the moment of fear, then he has practically no traumas. It's a recorded fact. Well, it is really so, friends. Moreover, this is, well, let's take the moment of falling. If you recall the stories from sports, there are lots of examples. When a person, I'll put it this way, any normal, mentally sane person who enters the ring before a fight should be afraid. If he is not afraid, he has problems. He has mental problems. He will have problems in the ring. But the question here is whether a person is able to use his fear as a tool, or does fear use him? If fear uses him, he loses. He is paralyzed.
Productivity.
Of course, huge losses, let's say, either hyper-responsibility or fear that I will lose if I do not win this fight now. For example, in boxing or in MMA, it doesn't matter. And the more overloaded a person is, and the more anxiety he has, the less efficient he is. It is believed, for some reason, that a person should be so charged up, so angry and aggressive entering the ring. But this aggression and anger are a cover for fear. And here, he invests not in fear, not in rationality, he invests in external aggression. And external aggression burns him up very quickly. But when he directs this adrenaline correctly, distributes it properly, firstly, he has fewer injuries, much fewer. Secondly, he is much faster. He is much faster than in training. Why is that? Why? Because in training, a person is safe. He is calm. But here he comes out for a real fight, and he understands that he will be beaten hard. It will hurt, and probably for a long time. So any sane person does not want to be beaten. But sports are sports. And here the one who is more patient and the one who is better prepared wins. And exactly one of the forms of preparation is not to eliminate fear, but to learn to use it. Let's take Mike Tyson. After all, he himself confessed that he was terrified of fighting every time. It was hard for him to enter the ring. But when he did it, he switched over. That is, he learned to act in spite of his fear. And if you remember his childhood, he was a big enough boy who was beaten even by girls. That is, he was afraid of everything and everyone. Until one day, he saw his strength, and the talent awoke in him. So he started acting in the moment of fear out of despair, and a genius boxer woke up in him. You see, the person made one step and became a good boxer.
He learned precisely to act.
He learned to act, yes.
That's interesting, Igor Mikhailovich. You've said that anger and irritation turn out to be the derivatives of fear?
No, I will put it this way. It is not fear that drives the real anger. It is impunity and the fear of the one who is afraid. So, it is like with animals. When your fear affects an animal, and the more afraid you are, the stronger its aggression is. Why? Because it senses that you are afraid. You put in a lot of vril, and there's a fight for vril here. And there's no need for any fantasizing here as to why there are maniacs, why there are bad, evil people who tend to be aggressive towards other people. Let's say, why does all this happen? Because if a person feels impunity, and he can manifest this animal inside himself, then hatred, anger, and many other things emerge in him. So, fear is also a necessary and important thing. The main thing is to learn to use it properly.
Igor Mikhailovich, another question is based on the information from the previous video. When you told about holistic perception, perception from personality, voluminous one, when you see all the cause and effect relationships, the question was the following. If a person develops on his spiritual path successfully and effectively, develops as personality, does it suggest that at some point there comes a moment in his life when he sees the whole picture perfectly, 24/7, like an oracle, you know, when this world is absolutely clear for him, nothing is unpredictable, and he has absolutely no emotions, no fears?
I'll say that would be a disaster. That would be the worst thing for a person if he got into such a state. Why? Such a life is uninteresting. Such a life is meaningless and stupid.
Without growth.
Without anything at all. A person must grow. He shouldn't know his next step, not just for tomorrow, but for now. The next step must be unpredictable for him. Why? Because when you have a lot of unknown, you have to overcome a lot. You have to rely on your perception through feelings. But if you follow the spiritual path, you have to perceive the world holistically. It is not divided. Well, this is a little bit different. Maybe. We will talk about this when a person is already coming up to the gate. What is going on in him? But that's not the topic of today's conversation. But on the way to that, a person must learn, and he must understand that there is a place for any demon here. There's a place for any accident, for any trouble, and there is a place for everything else as well. This world is such, this is the world which we call hell, but for us now, It is home, where we can feel well and good, and it's only up to us to decide what this world will be like. So, God forbid anyone to get into a state where they know everything. You see, when he's got the whole world in his palm, well, that's only if you connect directly to Satan. Because God is not interested in this world. He is interested in what comes from this world to the spiritual world. That is what is interesting to the spiritual world. As for watching everyone who has, a runny nose, who has some other problems, is that what the spiritual world is doing from morning till night? It has stuff to do. But our selfishness says so, and demons say so. Do you know why? Because the devil knows everything about everybody, and he tries to somehow transfer this onto the spiritual world and onto God. Why? Because our consciousness is a unified field, let's say, on the scale of our universe.
In every situation, he sends his newsletter, his advertisement, right?
Of course.
I mean, how he interprets it.
Of course. And he knows every step and everything else about everyone. And he makes plans for the future for each person. But a person becomes free as soon as he takes the first step in his spiritual development. I mean, why? He already goes against the system itself. And if he develops spiritually, he becomes invisible to the system itself. And that's where there are a lot of surprises. Yet, to know everything, God forbid. No. This is not life. There will be no growth, no development. While a human is here in order to develop and grow. This is a unique place. We've said it more than once, and I'll say it again. Here, a person, an ordinary person, a mortal one, with demons in his head, with a lot of problems, can become a bodhisattva within his life, within a short period of time. This is the only place where a person is able to ascend and develop so quickly and so seriously because he will never have such conditions anymore. And this is true. Whoever he becomes, if he becomes a subpersonality, he has no life at all. All he is left with is darkness, and erasure of him as unnecessary. Whereas if he becomes an angel, he will need countless, billions of years by our standards to become a bodhisattva. While here, he can do it within one lifetime. This is a unique place. And yes, there are a lot of problems here. I agree. Yes, it's hell. But you know, I will say this. Every sword is tempered in fire, in flame, and cooled in water to become strong. And so is a human here. A person as an angel must be tempered in hell in order to learn to distinguish the bad from the good, in order to understand that hatred and stupidity, all animal things, are inhuman, in order to crystallize in himself real love and understanding, and most importantly, responsibility. Responsibility not just for oneself, but responsibility even for other worlds. And this is important when a person already grows to a high level. And a person must learn to love. If a person does not learn to love, he will never understand who he is. Unless a person learns to love and longs for that love, exactly God's love, the love that is true and strong, he will never understand where he is. He will never be able to separate this hell from heaven. And since he's incapable of this, what is he to do in heaven, if hell is like heaven to him? If here he seeks refuge, if here he seeks a place to bow his head and find peace, what kind of a human is he? A person is here in order to seek love, to become a human, and learn to care for all who have a soul. That's the point. And that's when he becomes a messenger of God. That's when he becomes an angel here. And that is the point. Well, that's not the topic of today's video. But everything starts with love. So, my friends, let's just love each other sincerely and with all our hearts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Igor Mikhailovich. This is indeed love in action.
It should be like this. Thank you, friends. Peace be with you.